Hey y'all, before we get started in today's video, I just want to touch base on something. I want to apologize to everyone about the lack of content lately. And the reason for that is just that, lack of content. As you can see, the shop's pretty bare. Not much to work on. I've made many attempts to purchase motorcycles, full price, full asking price, throwing money at these people, and they're just like, nah, no response, no answer, won't meet up. I just don't get it. I don't know if it's the climate right now. It's just hot. Nobody's dealing with the motorcycles, but I have not been able to purchase anything to work on. So again, I'm just going to apologize for that. As soon as I can get some stuff going, we'll get back to some rebuilds. But for now, we're going to be working on a Sea-Doo that I acquired for labor, working on another Sea-Doo. If that interests you, and I hope it does, stick around. Hey, welcome back, friends. Today's video is never meant to be a video. I have a customer that brought me a couple of 2003 Sea-Doo GTI LE RFI jet skis. Just looking them over. One of them runs. The second one was locked up. So I went ahead and pulled the engine out of this, threw it up on the bench, took the top end apart, and found that the crankshaft was not spinning. The pistons were destroyed, the cylinders were damaged, and they decided to just give me this jet ski for my labor of working on the two of them. So now that I own this jet ski, I'm actually going to make a video. We're going to pull this engine apart, see if we can get it rebuilt, get a used engine, or get a reman engine for it. Let's see what road this takes us down. Well, let me get you all in here and get a closer look at this engine and try to determine what direction we're going to go with this thing. Whether we're just going to get a reman engine, get a used engine, or go ahead and put the time and effort into rebuilding this engine. So had to beat the pistons out of this thing, and they are destroyed. A lot of rust, a lot of scoring. The top of this piston is all gouged up. She's a rocker. I don't feel any play in the rod bearing, although the crank does not turn. And the block is full of sand, or the cooling passage is full of sand, and the block is completely full of water. Head has some corrosion and some pitting, although this can probably be cleaned up and reused. Cylinder's got a ton of rust in it. So if we were to rebuild this, I would have to measure this and see where we're at. I'm not going to really get any specs off the top of the pistons because they're just destroyed. We want to see if we're still on a standard bore, and see if we need to go to a 0.5 millimeter over or a full millimeter over on a rebore and piston set. This cylinder here is in better condition, although it definitely has some gouges. I gotta get these pistons off. I gotta get these cases split, and we're gonna take a look to see if there's any case damage whatsoever. That's gonna steer us in one direction or another, because if the cases are damaged, we're gonna be looking more for a used engine. If the cases are good, then we could possibly rebuild or do a reman. Normally I would use a piston pin puller to pull this through. This crankshaft is definitely no good, so I'm not too worried about it. Next, I need to take this PTO off, or a coupler as they call it. And one way to determine the threads on this thing, what direction the threads are, is to look into the back of your jet pump and see what direction your impeller spins. And this way you can determine which way this is going to unloosen, and it's going to be in the same direction as it turns. As it turns out, with this engine here, this engine from the back is spinning anti-clockwise or counterclockwise. From the front, it's clockwise. So it's going to be a standard thread. Now, to get this off, we're going to use this spline tool that we use for our jet pumps. That fits right inside of there. And obviously you have to hold your crankshaft. Our crankshaft is locked up, so it should not be an issue whatsoever. We should be able to spin this thing right off. However, if your crankshaft does move or your engine is together and you just want to take this off, a lot of times you can just go ahead and take the spark plug out and jam some rope down inside of there, so that it will, as you turn it, the piston will come up, hit the rope, and lock your crankshaft up. Sometimes these can be a pain. It's a 24mm socket. I'm using a 15/16, which has a little bit of slop in it, but it'll do the job. Well, we may have to put this on the floor so I can get a little more leverage. Oh, well, deciding to turn the crankshaft instead. Do is jam some rags down in here between the web and the case. Let's see if that'll be enough to hold it. Wow. Well, that PTO is fighting me like crazy. She don't want to come off. And I may not have to take it off. If I end up putting a used crankshaft in this engine, the one I got my eye on has a PTO on it already. And some of the used engines already have a PTO on them already as well. So let me just finish stripping this thing down. We'll get the magneto case off here and get the flywheel off. And then get these cases separated. Snap.
All right, I gotta get this crankshaft position sensor out of here. It is frozen. Still in good shape, no damage. Oof. That valve is damaged. And the block is also damaged. So it's going to be pretty much a formality at this point. I'm going to finish tearing this down just for the H of it. But I feel like I'm going to go ahead and get another used engine for this. This could probably be cleaned up and salvaged, but not by me. The lower half of this case, minus a broken bolt, which I can extract, is in pretty good shape. Counterbalance is nice. Bearings sound good. We got a couple of parts here we can salvage for something else. So there's definitely an issue right there. I've got an oddball feeling that this crank is actually okay. And now I'm wishing I didn't beat on it. There's no up and down play in the rods. All the bearings spin nice and free. Well, it'll probably make a good core crank anyway. Now there's a special tool for pulling these out, but I've got a slide hammer. So this is what we ended up with. I got myself a used engine. This thing's in really good condition. Looks like it was rebuilt very, very, very recently. There's just a couple of issues that I have to deal with. Let's get it down on the bench and get a closer look at what needs to be done. So first thing I'm going to do is get a little bit of 2-cycle oil down in these cylinders, and we're going to do a compression check. I got about 125 on this cylinder. And about 125 on this cylinder. All right, so there are a couple of things that I need to deal with on this engine. I'll have to take parts off my old engine. This water jacket or water outlet here is broken, which is no big deal. I have the piece on my other engine. I'm not sure if I'm going to swap this whole piece out or see if I can just swap out this threaded fitting, which I may do. And also this nipple is broken off, and they break so easily. It's broken on mine too, so I have to order this piece. I'll put this in when I get the engine back in the hull. It sticks out a little bit too wide to sneak this thing in, and I don't want to risk breaking it. Clean up these rave valves with a little acetone. So at this point here, I'm going to start prepping this hull for the new engine to get put in, meaning that this thing is full of oil. The reason I feel like it blew up is whoever was wrenching on this thing, it looked like they had a new oil filter in there, but they hooked the oil lines up totally incorrectly on the tank. And I have a feeling that that's going to be the cause of this, because there was no oil in the filter at all. So at this point here, I want to pull that tank out, the oil tank out, get that completely cleaned top to bottom, clean all the lines out top to bottom, clean the hull out, and we're going to drain the fuel, throw that in the old Tundra, get some new fresh non-ethanol for this, and give it a general look over to see if there's anything else I can see that needs to be done before we put this engine back in. All right, so somebody's definitely been in here. They use this heavy duty fuel hose as the feed. Now there's two feeds on the bottom of this tank. One of them goes to the bottom of the engine block, and what that does is feed the 2-cycle oil to the rotary valve and its shaft, and then it is returned from the other side of the block up into the top of the tank. Well, here's where our problem lies with this particular one, and I can't say 100% if this caused the problem or not, but this hose is supposed to go on this side. This here is a one-way valve. It only allows air to get in one direction. So they put this in the wrong spot. This should have been over here. That may have been causing a restriction of some sort. And your first clue should have been that this hose is just way too big for this little nozzle. And it's been crushed down on here so bad that it probably won't even fit on here anymore. I'll have to cut it back. But that's supposed to fit on here. The other line that comes off this obviously feeds the filter, and then this will go down to feed your oil injection pump. So at this point here, I'm going to pull off all these lines and discard them and replace them with new lines, clear, so I can make sure oil is flowing, which is the purpose of the clear lines. Wow, slippery, huh? Who knew that oil was slippery? This sensor here is the oil level sensor, and this will let you know when you're low on oil. So the one-way valve is working. It will blow in this way and not come back this way. It's coming back a little bit because it's got oil in it, but we will clean that out and she'll be good. And now I'm just going to wash the tank out. It's actually pretty clean, so they definitely cleaned it. I'm just going to give it another good quick wash up with some acetone, and we'll get this thing back together. Now I'm just going to go ahead and check to make sure that the oil chamber for the rotary shaft is sealed and it's not going to leak. So I blocked off this side. Now just going ahead and pressurize this to 3 psi or 0.25 bar. And we're just going to make sure that that's going to hold pressure. That looks real good. This valve here on the crankcase is also a one-way valve. It's got an arrow on it showing what direction, which should be out. If you blow into this, you should not be able to blow into it, but with a little bit of vacuum pressure, you should be able to feel that valve release. Like I said, I've got two covers with the broken nipples. One of them I did a JB Weld repair, and it's solid. It's not going anywhere. Although I don't have 100% faith in a repair like this. So what I'm going to do is repair this other cover using this brass barb with an 1/8 inch NPT thread. So first, to prep this, I am going to grind this flat. Now the proper drill bit for this thread size is 21/64 or like 8.3 millimeter. Then what we're going to use is an 1/8 inch NPT tap. And I'm going to use a little bit of lubricant. Since we're working on a 2-stroke, I want to use some 2-stroke oil. Only seems fitting. Now, to be 100% sure this is going to be secure, I'm going to clean both of these up real well with acetone, and we are going to use a little bit of JB Weld on these threads. Once that completely cures, that's about as solid as it's possibly ever going to get. Probably better than factory. Obviously, we're going to go ahead and cut this clamp off, get this fitting out of here. Next, I'm going to check the bottom of this to make sure I have no leaks in this part of the cooling system. I'm going to plug this off and go ahead and pressurize the system to 3 psi like we did with the oil reservoir. A little bit of a leak right there. The inside of this case has a little bit of corrosion, so I have to do a little bit more cleaning. But this is a good reason to check this now, because you don't want to be dealing with this while it's in the boat. Now at this point here, it's pretty critical to get this drive shaft in alignment with this engine. However, I'm not going to do that, and it's kind of hacky. I just don't have the tool. I've never invested in the tool to do this. However, I'm doing a lot of sea-doos lately, so I should probably go ahead and bite the bullet on this one and get the drive shaft alignment tool. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just loosen up all the mounts. I'm going to, by feel, get the drive shaft as close as I possibly can to being true. So the cooling systems on these are not too bad. They're pretty straightforward. I go ahead anyway and print out some diagrams of the cooling system and any other system that I might need, just to make sure I got it 100% perfect. You see these things hooked up incorrectly all the time, so just want to double check myself when I'm done to be sure. It's always recommended to do this. If you guys need a manual, I'll put a link down in the description, emanual.com. Great prices. Use my discount code, get 22% off until the end of August of 2024. Helps me, helps them, and it helps you. Win-win-win. This is a good idea on most things, but especially on a marine engine or anything that's going to be around the water. When you're hooking up your electrical connections, use a dielectric grease. That will help to keep moisture and water out of your plug. So at this point here, you can see we've got our new feed lines to the crankcase. We've got a brand new feed line to an oil filter down to our pump. Now these oil filters, this is the direction you want them to be. Sort of like an arrow. So you want big end towards small end. All right, so this is where we're going to get into it. 2-cycle oils. Your Sea-Doo is an animal all of its own. Basically what they do is they make these engines produce as much power as they possibly can out of the factory. So the original 951 carbureted, for example, 2-cylinder, producing 135 horsepower. This is on like the early 2000 XPs and stuff like that. The Yamaha of the time with the 1200 cc non-power valve motor was a 1200 cc 3-cylinder engine producing the same amount of horsepower. So you can tell that that 1000 cc, less than 1000 cc engine 2-cylinder is putting out a lot more power. In other words, it's tuned to the max. They're going to require a special oil. Usually with Yamahas, you can pretty much throw gas station oil in there and they don't really even care. Always follow your manufacturer's recommendations on that. But I've used crappy oil in Yamahas and had good luck. Sea-Doos do not like it. Now, if you got your typical 717 engine or something like that, it's a non-power valve engine or rave system, as they call it, you can get away with some semi-synthetic injection oil without much problem. You can even use a XPS full mineral oil in those. It's not a big problem. They'll run just great. It's injection oil. So any of these power valve motors, you want to use a full synthetic injection oil, API-TC. Do not use TCW3 oil, especially any 787s, 951s. The XPS E-Tech oil, which is very expensive, $75 a gallon right now, something like that, is what Sea-Doo recommends for their skis. That's going to be for this particular ski as well, which is the GTI RFI engine with a 787. However, back in the day, there wasn't equivalents. Now there are. I love using this Quicksilver. Now Quicksilver makes a bunch of 2-stroke oils, but what we're going to use here is PWC full synthetic 2-stroke oil. This will work absolutely fine in this boat, and it will work basically in any Sea-Doo that you've got that's a 2-stroke with oil injection. Now some people say, I want a premix and stuff like that. Well, you can't do that with fuel injected boats. You can with carbureted engines, and the reason being for this is an RFI or Rotax fuel injection uses fuel injectors that inject the fuel and technically oil mixture into the backside of the engine below the pistons. So it would technically lubricate the crankshaft and the top end, but you're not going to lubricate your rotary valve, which is eventually going to fail on you. And with the direct injection or DI boats, the fuel injectors are right in the top, and you won't even lubricate your bottom end or your rotary valve. So you're looking at very
serious engine damage there. Not to mention that you start changing the air-fuel ratios when you start mixing oil with gas. So it's a no-no on fuel-injected boats. Technically, you could put a little bit in as a pre-mix on an initial break-in on the boat, but after that, no. You just want to use the oil injection system. They're almost bulletproof. Take care of your lines, clean your filters. Do not mix oil types. So in other words, we have a clean system here. We're going with the Quicksilver PWC. I'm not going to mix in the future any E-Tech or XPS oils or anything like that. If I was going to move to that type of oil, I would start this whole process all over again, cleaning the entire system out, replacing the lines, and going with a different oil. Sometimes oils don't gel, and then they do gel, if that makes sense. So they don't mix well, and then they could potentially gel up and cause blocking. So this is what we're going to use. It says PWC on it. Quicksilver does make full synthetic 2-stroke oil. It does not say PWC. If you read the back of it, it's not going to be the correct oil. This is what you want. All right, so as you can see, as we filled up our 2-stroke oil, our crankcase feed tube filled up with oil, and now the oil is starting to return, and it will pump through as soon as we start the engine. But what are you not noticing? Well, if you look down at your oil feed line that goes down to your pump, there's no oil in there whatsoever. At this point now, we need to bleed this system. If we don't, you are going to burn this engine up because there's not going to be any oil getting to it. And the way we do that, and of course I left everything out of the way so you can see, but there's this hex fitting on the front of the pump. We're going to go ahead and put a rag down there. We're going to open this up and let it gravity bleed until we see no more air coming out. As you can see, the oil is dripping out here. I hope you can see that. Look over your line while you're doing this. Make sure there's no air bubbles in there. And a good deal. So we're bled to the pump. We're good to go. These lines still have some air in them. I can't really get any oil in them until I start the engine. So the procedure for that is going to be, once we get this engine started, we're going to run this thing at idle only, and we're going to advance our timing pump to full until we see the oil pumping through the lines. I'm going to go ahead and get my throttle body back on so we can set our pump timing properly. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and adjust the oil pump. The initial setting on these 787s, and it may be different for your particular machine. It's always good to get yourself a manual. Make sure you're doing this right because it's absolutely critical. So if you look right here on the front of the gear of the pump, there's a line. And then if you look on the pump itself, there's a line right here. Now the throttle linkage adjusted properly, this line and this line should line up like that. So what I need to do is tighten up this cable so that that lines up properly. So if you're standing on the throttle body side of the engine, the left side, this lower cable right here, this is the adjustment for the oil pump. So we're going to go ahead and loosen the lock nuts up and then make the adjustments here to bring those other lines in spec. In this particular case, we have to tighten the cable. So we will loosen this top lock nut and pull the cable down.
Now that we've done our adjustment, you can see the line on the oil pump lever is lining up with the mark on the pump itself.
So this step with adjusting the pump is absolutely critical. This could cost you an engine if it's not done correctly. Put some fresh E0 in there. All right, now that we get everything together and I've double checked everything, got the battery hooked back up, time for the finger crossing activities. All right, so we got our 2 beeps. I heard the fuel pump run. I'm gonna go ahead and cycle this a few times to get the fuel pressure up. Sounds like we're there. I'm gonna hit this start button, just see if she pops off. And if she does, we're in good shape. We'll get it outside and get it on a hose. I'm ecstatic. I'm elated. Yeah, didn't know what to expect on this thing. Even with this used engine, you just never really know what you're getting. So I'm pretty happy with this whole situation. Now I'm gonna do is drag it outside, throw it on the hose, and let this thing warm up real good. Run it for a little while, and if all is well, I'll either go and lake test it first or just do a full detail on it real quick, because she's pretty dirty. I'm curious to see if she'll clean up. Now, I did say when I first started this thing that I was going to run it idle only. I did blip the throttle a few times just to make sure that it would take the fuel. Keep in mind, when I was putting this thing together, I squirted a ton of 2-stroke oil down inside the rotary valve to make sure that all that was going to be lubricated before we started up. So one little blip, not going to be an issue. I will not run it anymore above idle until I get those oil lines filled.
This port here in the front is a visual on these Sea-Doos that allows you to see if water is flowing through the engine. I was not getting any through there. Very common problem with this is that bugs will make a home in here. You could stick a piece of wire in there and clean it out and then blow through it with some compressed air. That hose connects here, so I wasn't getting any water coming out. I've blown it out and we should be good to go now.
And I'm using New Wave in here, but Simple Green will work just as well. Looks good. All we got to do now is get this thing out to the lake, do a couple of test runs. All right, so we got some issues with the ski. On the hose, she idles great, revs great. Second she hits the water, nothing. She shuts right off. The drag of the water on the impeller, the engine's not producing enough power for whatever reason, and it just will not even start in the water. Pull it out of the water, starts right up. Back it in while it's running, shuts right off. So I think what I'm going to do is just end the video here, put something out for this weekend. And the next video that we do on this boat will be all the diagnostics that I have to go to figure out what's going on. So I put a used engine in it. I never even took a look to see if the rotary valve was timed correctly. Somebody did a rebuild on it, so who really knows what's going on with it? Is it an electronic issue? The dash doesn't work. So can't even get any kind of indications with stuff like that. Sea-Doo kind of is a pain when it comes to getting codes out of it, because you need to use some sort of a scan tool to do it. There's just no way to like flash codes to the dash or anything like that. What I can do, however, is do testing on every specific component, including fuel pressure, checking the fuel injectors to make sure that they're squirting properly and clean. I will also get into testing like the throttle position sensor, the air temperature sensor, coolant temperature sensor. The thing is, with a throttle position sensor, you have to set 0 on it, and of course you need a scan tool for that, and I don't have that, so I may end up having to purchase a Can-Do Pro or something like that so I can do a couple of these skis. Also, I'd like to reach out to any of you Sea-Doo mechanics that have potentially dealt with these RFI engines before. Again, the symptoms are that it lacks power. As soon as it hits the water, I can almost get it to start if I play with the throttle, and if I hold it wide open, it just doesn't have even enough power to push the boat forward, let it go, she just shuts off. So if you guys have ever experienced anything like this and you want to give me a kind of direction to go in, I would certainly appreciate that. But as of this, we're going to go ahead and start doing component testing as far as I can go with it. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, apologize for the lack of content. I'm working hard to get some more bike builds in here, and I've got a couple in the works. So stay tuned for those. Again, don't forget to give me the thumbs up. Hit that subscription button. I'd certainly appreciate it. Now let me go ahead and get back to work on this thing. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.